Good evening, everyone. In tonight's episode of our horror narration series, we'll be sharing 3 horrific true winter horror stories that will make you think twice before venturing into the cold. These aren't campfire tales or urban legends passed down through generations. These are real accounts from real people who experienced something in the frozen wilderness that defies explanation. Something that watches from between snow-laden trees. Something that rises from beneath frozen lakes. Something that knocks on motel doors in the dead of night, wearing the voices of the people you love. Winter is supposed to be beautiful, peaceful, a time when nature sleeps beneath blankets of pristine white snow. But what these 3 people discovered is that winter doesn't put everything to sleep. Some things wake up when the temperature drops. Some things thrive in the cold. Some things have been waiting in the ice and darkness for centuries, and they're hungry for warmth, for life, for you. So before we begin, I need to warn you. If you're listening to this alone, in the dark, maybe turn on a light, because after hearing what happened to Tyler in the forests of Manitoba, to Rebecca on that frozen lake in Alberta, and to Kenneth at that abandoned motel in Montana, you'll never look at winter the same way again. You'll never feel safe when the snow starts to fall. And you'll understand why these survivors still sleep with their lights on, why they still check their windows every night, and why they'll never, ever answer a knock at their door after midnight. These are their stories, and I promise you, every word is true. Some people say winter brings peace. The quiet snowfall, the stillness of frozen lakes, the way sound seems to die in the cold air. But I'm here to tell you that winter doesn't bring peace. It brings something else. Something that watches. Something that waits. And once it notices you, it never stops looking. My name is Tyler, and what happened to me 3 winters ago in the forests of northern Manitoba still keeps me awake at night. I'm telling you this because maybe you'll believe me. Maybe you won't make the same mistake I did. Back in December 2021, I was working as a forestry surveyor. It was good money, even if it meant spending weeks alone in the wilderness during the coldest months of the year. I'd done it for 5 seasons by then, so the isolation didn't bother me anymore. Or at least, I thought it didn't. I had my cabin, my radio, my routine. Every morning I'd trek out to mark timber sections, take measurements, log coordinates. Every evening I'd return before dark, make dinner, and sleep. Simple. Safe. Except things started feeling wrong about a week into that particular assignment. It began with the tracks. I'd see them every morning in the fresh snow around my cabin. These strange footprints that didn't match any animal I knew. They were too large for a wolf. Too narrow for a bear. The stride was wrong too, sometimes human-like, sometimes not, and they always circled the cabin, never came to the door, never left, just endless circles in the snow, like something had been pacing around me all night while I slept. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a wolverine, maybe my eyes were playing tricks in the early morning light, but deep down I knew better. I'd been in these woods long enough to recognize when something was off. The first time I actually saw it, I was about 2 miles from the cabin. The sun was already setting, painting the snow that burnt orange color that only happens in deep winter. I was hurrying back, my breath fogging in the -30 air, when I heard it. Footsteps, crunching in the snow behind me. I stopped. The footsteps stopped. I started walking again. They started again, matching my pace exactly. My throat went dry. I turned around slowly, and that's when I saw it standing between 2 pine trees about 50 yards back. It looked human. Sort of. The proportions were wrong. Too tall, maybe 7 feet. Arms too long, hanging past where the knees should be. And it was just standing there, perfectly still, watching me. I couldn't make out a face in the dying light. Just a dark silhouette that radiated wrongness. I remember thinking, very clearly, that I should not run. Running meant prey. But every instinct in my body was screaming at me to move. I forced myself to turn around calmly and keep walking toward the cabin. Not too fast, not too slow. Behind me, I heard those footsteps again, closer this time, keeping pace. The walk back to my cabin took 15 minutes. Those were the longest 15 minutes of my life. I could hear it behind me the entire way, sometimes close, sometimes farther back, but always there, always following. I didn't look back again. I was too terrified of what I might see if I did. When I finally reached my cabin, I slammed the door and locked it, my hand shaking so badly I could barely work the deadbolt. I went to the window and peered out into the darkness. At first, I saw nothing. Then my eyes adjusted, and I saw it standing at the tree line, exactly where the porch light ended. Just standing there, watching my cabin, watching me. I backed away from the window and grabbed my radio to call for an early extraction, but all I got was static. I tried for hours. Nothing but white noise and the occasional click that almost sounded like breathing. That's when I heard the footsteps on my roof. Slow, deliberate steps. Back and forth. Back and forth. Something was walking on top of my cabin. The wooden beams creaked under its weight. I could track its movement by the sound. Living room. Kitchen. Bedroom. Back to the living room. Over and over. I sat in the corner with my rifle, watching the ceiling, listening to that thing pace above me. Hours passed. The footsteps never stopped, never hesitated. Just that steady, methodical walking. And occasionally, in between steps, I'd hear something else. A sound like sniffing, like it was trying to smell me through the roof. As dawn approached, the footsteps finally stopped. I waited another hour before I had the courage to look outside. It was gone, but in the fresh morning snow, I saw the tracks. They went up the side of my cabin, across the roof, and back down. But that's not what terrified me most. There were handprints in the snow next to my bedroom window. Long, thin handprints with fingers that were far too long, and they were pressed against the glass like something had been trying to look inside while I slept. I packed everything I could carry and started hiking toward the main road. It was a 30-mile trek, but I didn't care. I wasn't spending another night in those woods. I radioed as I walked, finally getting a weak signal around noon. I told them to send someone immediately. Told them I was extracting early due to wildlife concerns. They asked what kind of wildlife. I couldn't answer. What do you call something that walks like a man but moves like a predator? What do you call something that watches you with intelligence behind its eyes? Something that knows what you are and finds it interesting. I never made it back to survey that section. I told the company I was done, took the penalty for breaking contract, and left. People thought I'd cracked from the isolation. Maybe they were right, but I know what I saw. I know what followed me, and I know it's still out there. Because last week, I woke up to fresh snow, and there in my backyard, 300 miles from those Manitoba woods, were footprints circling my house. The same tracks, the same impossible stride, just walking in circles, round and round, like it finally found me again, like it's been looking for me this whole time. You ever have one of those gut feelings that something's wrong? That little voice in the back of your head telling you to turn around, go home, don't go through with your plans? I had that feeling the morning we left for Lake Mistaya. I should have listened. I'm Rebecca, and I need to tell someone what happened on that lake. The police didn't believe us. Our families think we're traumatized and confused. But I know what I saw down there beneath the ice. I know what came up. It was supposed to be a simple weekend trip. My brother Jake and our friend Colin had this tradition of going ice fishing every January at this remote lake up in the Alberta Rockies. They'd been doing it for years, always invited me, and I'd always said no. Too cold, too boring, too isolated. But that year, I'd just gone through a bad breakup and needed to get away from everything, so I finally agreed to join them. The lake was frozen solid, almost 3 feet of ice according to Jake. We drove out onto it in his truck. parked near the center where the fish supposedly ran deeper, and set up our gear. 3 holes augured through the ice, 3 folding chairs, 3 fishing rods, and a little propane heater to keep us from freezing. The sun was bright, the sky was clear, and for the first few hours, it was actually kind of peaceful. That's when Colin's line started doing something weird. It wasn't pulling like a fish. It was moving in these slow, rhythmic tugs. Down, up, like something was testing it. Colin thought he'd snagged on something at first, but when he tried to reel in, whatever was down there pulled back. Hard. The line screamed out, burning against his reel. Colin was a big guy, played football in college, and he was struggling. Then the line went slack. Just like that. Colin reeled in what was left. The line had been cut, not snapped. Cut, clean through, like someone had taken scissors to it. We all stared at each other. Jake made some joke about Pike with knives, but nobody laughed. Something about it felt wrong. I looked down into Colin's fishing hole, peering into that dark water beneath the ice, and I swear I saw movement. Just a flash of something pale moving past the opening. That's when Jake's line went taut, then mine, at the exact same time. Both of us were pulled forward, so hard we nearly fell off our chairs. Our reels were screaming, line disappearing into the black water faster than seemed possible. And then we heard it, a sound from under the ice, a scraping, like fingernails on glass, but deeper, reverberating through the frozen surface. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. The ice beneath our feet vibrated with it. Jake cut his line. I cut mine. We all stood up, backing away from the holes we drilled. The scraping sound continued, and then we saw it. Cracks, spreading out from our fishing holes like spiderwebs. Fast, too fast. The ice was breaking from underneath. Colin shouted for us to get to the truck. We ran, slipping on the frozen surface, and I remember thinking how stupid we'd been to drive out onto the lake. The truck was maybe 20 yards away, but it felt like a mile. Behind us, I could hear the ice groaning, that awful cracking sound getting louder. I made the mistake of looking back. One of the fishing holes was getting wider. The ice around it was breaking away in chunks, falling into the black water below. And something was coming up. I saw hands first. Pale, waterlogged hands with skin that looked like it had been underwater for months. Then arms. Then a head breaking the surface. But it wasn't one person. It was multiple. 3, 4, maybe more bodies pulling themselves up onto the ice. They moved wrong, joints bending in directions that shouldn't be possible. Their faces were bloated, eyes milky white, mouths hanging open in permanent silent screams. And they were all looking directly at us. We reached the truck. Jake's hands were shaking so badly, he dropped the keys. Colin grabbed them, got the door open, and we scrambled inside. Jake gunned the engine, and we started driving. But the ice was breaking faster now. I looked in the side mirror and saw those things following us. Not walking, crawling, scuttling across the ice like spiders, impossibly fast, their bodies twisting and jerking with each movement. The ice beneath the truck cracked. We lurched, the back wheels breaking through, and for one horrible moment I thought we were going into the water. Jake floored it, and the truck lurched forward, front-wheel drive barely pulling us along. Behind us, those things were getting closer. I could see their faces now in the mirror, their mouths opening and closing like they were trying to speak. Dark water pouring out. We made it to solid ice, then to shore, and Jake didn't stop driving until we reached the highway. None of us spoke. We couldn't. What were we supposed to say? What words exist for something like that? We reported it to the police, told them there were bodies in Lake Mistaya. They searched, found nothing. The ice where we'd been fishing had refrozen smooth, like nothing had ever happened. Our equipment was gone. No holes, no cracks, no evidence. They questioned us separately, probably thought we'd been drinking or doing drugs, but we all told the same story. We all saw the same thing. Eventually, they dropped it, told us the stress and cold must have caused a shared hallucination. But I know what I saw, and I know those things are still down there, under that ice, waiting. Because last month, Colin disappeared. He'd been living up north, working at a mine site. They found his truck parked beside a frozen lake. His fishing gear was set up on the ice. 3 holes augured through, 3 chairs arranged in a circle. But Colin was gone. They searched for weeks. Never found a body. I got a call from Jake 2 days after Colin disappeared. He could barely speak. Said he'd been having dreams. Dreams of being under the ice, looking up through frozen water, seeing a shadowy figure standing above him. Dreams of cold hands grabbing his ankles, pulling him down. He wanted to know if I'd been having them too. I lied and told him no. But I have. Every single night since that fishing trip. And lately, the dreams have been getting worse. More vivid. More real. Last night, I dreamed I was drowning, water filling my lungs, sinking deeper and deeper. And just before I woke up, I saw them. All those pale faces in the darkness below, waiting for me, smiling. I'm afraid to sleep now, afraid to close my eyes, because I think they're calling us back. I think whatever we woke up that day wants us to return, and I'm terrified that one night I won't be strong enough to resist. There are places in this world where reality feels thin, where the rules we take for granted don't quite apply. The Pinecrest Motel on Highway 89 in Montana is one of those places. I know, because I spent 3 days there during the blizzard of 2022, and I barely made it out with my sanity intact. My name is Kenneth, and I'm a long-haul trucker. Been driving for 15 years, seen most of this country through a windshield. I've driven through every kind of weather, every kind of road, but I'd never seen a storm like the one that hit that February night. I was heading south through Montana when the snow started. Within an hour, it went from light flurries to complete whiteout conditions. Visibility was less than 10 feet. The highway was disappearing under fresh powder faster than the plows could clear it. The radio was broadcasting emergency warnings, telling everyone to get off the roads immediately. That's when I saw the sign for the Pinecrest Motel, one of those old roadside places from the 50s, barely hanging on in the age of chain hotels. The neon sign was flickering, half the letters burned out, but I didn't care. I needed shelter, and I needed it now. I pulled into the parking lot. There were 3 other vehicles there, all buried under several inches of snow. The motel itself was a long, single-story building with maybe 20 rooms. Most of the windows were dark. The office light was on, though, so I made my way through the driving snow and went inside. The clerk at the desk was an older man, maybe 70, with deep-set eyes that never quite looked at me directly. He didn't ask for ID or a credit card, just slid a key across the counter and told me I was in room 12. Said the storm would probably last a few days. Said I should stay in my room at night. I asked him what he meant by that. He just repeated it. Stay in your room at night. Don't open the door. Don't look outside. Then he went back to reading his newspaper, like I'd stopped existing. Room 12 was at the far end of the motel. Basic setup. Bed, TV, bathroom, small window facing the parking lot. The heater worked, which was all I cared about. I dropped my bag, laid down, and tried to sleep, listening to the wind howl outside. I woke up around 3 in the morning to the sound of footsteps outside my door. Slow, shuffling footsteps. Back and forth. Back and forth. I figured it was another guest and tried to ignore it. But then the footsteps stopped directly outside my room, and I heard breathing. Heavy, wet breathing, like someone with fluid in their lungs. The door handle rattled, slowly, testing to see if it was locked. My heart was pounding. I called out, asked who was there. The breathing stopped. The footsteps retreated. I heard them moving away, going farther down the row of rooms. Then I heard them stop at another door. More rattling. More testing. I got up and looked through the peephole. The hallway was empty. Nothing but snow accumulating against the concrete walkway outside. But I could still hear those footsteps. Still hear that breathing. Moving from door to door. Testing each one. In the morning, I mentioned it to the clerk. He looked at me with those strange eyes and asked if I'd stayed in my room. I said yes. He nodded and said I was smart. Said the others hadn't been smart. I asked what he meant by the others. He didn't answer. That afternoon, I explored the motel, trying to stay busy while the storm raged. Most of the rooms appeared empty, but 3 had cars parked outside. I knocked on their doors. No answer. I tried room 7, where a blue sedan was parked. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open. The room was freezing. The window was wide open. Snow piled up on the floor and bed, and there were scratch marks on the walls. Deep gouges, like someone had clawed at the plaster with their fingernails. The bed was torn apart. Dark stains that might have been blood were smeared across the sheets. I backed out of that room fast. Went to check the other occupied rooms. Same thing. Windows open. Snow everywhere. Signs of struggle. But no people. No bodies. Nothing but those scratch marks and the stains. I confronted the clerk. Demanded to know what was happening. He looked at me with something like pity and said that the motel gets lonely in winter. Said things come down from the mountains when it snows. Things that used to be people. Things that freeze to death up in the high country and don't realize they're dead. They wander until they find warmth, find light, find the living. He said they come to the motel because they remember what it's like to be warm. Remember what it's like to sleep in a bed. But they can't come inside. Not unless you let them in. Not unless you open your door. I thought he was insane. But that night, it happened again. The footsteps. The breathing. The rattling of my door handle. And this time, I heard voices. Multiple voices outside my door. Pleading, begging. They sounded desperate. Cold. Lost. They were asking me to let them in. Saying they were freezing. Saying they needed help. One voice sounded like my mother. She'd been dead for 10 years, but I swear it was her voice. Calling my name. Asking why I wouldn't help her. Why I wouldn't open the door for my own mother. I put my hands over my ears. Squeezed my eyes shut. But I could still hear them. Still hear the scratching at my door. The pounding. They were getting more aggressive. More angry. The door was shaking in its frame. Then I heard something else. A different sound. A crack. One of the other room doors had given way. I heard something rush inside. Heard furniture being thrown around. Heard a sound that might have been eating. The footsteps returned to my door. The pounding intensified. My door was starting to splinter. I grabbed my truck keys, went to the window, and forced it open. The cold hit me like a punch to the chest. I climbed out into the snow and ran for my truck. The storm was still raging, but I didn't care. I started the engine, threw it in gear, and drove. I couldn't see anything. Could barely keep the truck on the road. But I drove anyway, because staying at that motel meant dying. Or worse, I made it to a proper town by dawn. The storm had passed. I went to a diner, warmed up, called the highway patrol. Told them about the Pinecrest Motel. Told them about the missing guests. They said they'd send someone to investigate. 3 days later, they called me back. Said they'd found the motel. Said it had been abandoned for 20 years. No clerk. No guests. No recent tire tracks except mine. The rooms I described were empty. No evidence of anyone being there. But they did find scratch marks on walls. Found dark stains that tested positive for blood. Found 3 cars buried in snow in the parking lot. Cars that had been reported missing over the past 5 winters. Cars whose drivers had never been found. I don't drive through Montana in winter anymore. Don't care how long the detour is. Because I know what's out there. I know what waits at places like the Pinecrest Motel. And I know that if I'd opened my door that night, if I'd let those things inside, I'd still be there. Not quite dead. Not quite alive. Just another frozen thing wandering the mountains, looking for warmth I'd never feel again.